marginalized victim. Even the very profound the Vietnam Memorial in Washington. How many of you been to it?
Last week.
Oh, just last month. Very, very fresh memories. What about this memorial is quite different from, say, if you go across Annandale, Virginia, and you see the Iwo Jima Marine Corps raising the flag at Mount Suribachi? The names. Right? What else about the Vietnam Memorial invokes a certain... I mean, when you went through it, how many of you really felt like talking or going out for hot dogs and ice cream?
Well, in the Vietnam Memorial, it's honoring all the people who died. All the other memorials also honor those who survived or showed what they did.
Exactly, right? There's kind of a lament there, correct? Even think about, yeah, go on.
Well, there's another thing. When the design was going through that, when they approved the wall design, there was an outcry of criticism against it because they marked it as the wall of shame.
That's right. And in addition, the original architect was a young Chinese American woman. And when some veterans organizations found out there was a Chinese American, they protested and said, we're not going to let any chink or goo, and those were the words used exactly, to use. We fought them, why are they to design our war memorial? So it was a very controversial decision.
And then they had to respond to the criticism of the wall and then created the statue of the troops.
Soldiers.
Yeah.
And how many people even go to the soldiers, really? Almost everyone goes to the wall. Now, what's also interesting about the wall, how are the names listed?
When they died.
No? No? Completely at random. It's not done by year. It's not done by alphabetical order. So if you're looking for a loved one, you have to go through all 58,000 names. Took my father there. He didn't get past the first panel. Had to take him away from him. And you see people there. Did you see the emotions there? What people leave behind, the letters? Seeing people press their faces up against. So in a way, it shows that something tragic happened here, but it doesn't tell us what happened. But I'm going to offer a critique of the wall in the sense that it's ahistorical. For the one thing, it only recognizes the 58,000 American soldiers who died in Vietnam, correct? That list is incomplete from the perspective of how many U.S. soldiers died from their injuries afterwards. Their names aren't listed on that wall. How about the American soldiers who died from Agent Orange? How about the American soldiers who died from alcoholism, from suicide, from drug abuse? I would argue we could easily add 200 to 300,000 names to that. What about the mothers, the wives, and the children who were affected by their fathers or their dads or their brothers' engagement in Vietnam? I grew up in Iowa, started kindergarten in 1969. The Vietnam War is going on. My mother's Japanese. Most people at that time, if you're Asian, you could be Jap, Chink, Gook. So I was called all of them. I was in second grade on the playground, and I was just minding my own business, and this kid came out, at fifth or sixth grade, and he had tears in his eye. He just came running up to me, and he just punched me. Hit me right in the mouth, split both my lips in the back of my head, and fell back. I found out why, is that his brother had been killed in action in Vietnam, and I was the closest thing to the enemy. So there are very powerful memories about this. But about the Vietnam War Memorial, in some ways it's incomplete. It doesn't acknowledge all of the mass suffering that occurred. But even there, it still falls into the trap that the Vietnam War was an American war. Because if we really wanted to commemorate about this war, not only should we list all those other Americans who died after the fact, who else should probably be listed on that wall?
The Native peoples in college, whatever people were around.
In addition, what about the Hmong? They were American allies. Are their names listed on the wall? They are not. What about the South Vietnamese who were American allies? They're not listed on the wall. And what about the overall Vietnamese population? The civilians. Because we forget, yes, this was 58,000 American lives, maybe 300,000 more we could add on top of that. I can't say how many of my father's friends who have died after Vietnam. Alcohol, drug abuse, suicide. My dad has his own demons that he's been battling for many years. But we forget about the proportion of the Vietnamese who died. If we took the number of Vietnamese who died in the war in Vietnam and put it in terms of ratio to the American population, it'd be about 30% of the American population that been killed in Vietnam. If we put the Vietnam names on there, I did some rough math, which is not my forte, that's why I'm just doing it, right? You know what they say about historians? Became historians if you couldn't pass the first semester of calculus, right? So anyway, that may not be true for any of you, but it was true for me. I would estimate that if we took the same space with all the Vietnamese who died there, that wall would stretch about 3 miles. Puts it to perspective. I would argue that we, in America, have learned the wrong lessons from Vietnam. Sometimes we learn the wrong thing in history because we fail to ask the right question. There's nothing really wrong with this question, but it assumes what? Why did we lose? It assumes what? The United States could have or should have. And I'm going to argue for the rest of the unit that the United States could not have won in Vietnam, which is not something that you hear many people willing to talk about, and it gets me in trouble, so I'm ready for it. I am going to put a small asterisk behind there. The United States could have won if they were willing to kill the vast majority of the Vietnamese population. And then we have to ask, what kind of victory would that be? To me, I think the better question to ask, and the one that changes the way that we, because if you ask the question that way, then it leads our research, our thinking down a certain path, right? What if we change this question, why did Vietnam win? And once you pose that question, then it takes your inquiry down a different path. Now, this is a path, this is a question that in America we are unwilling to ask. The question is why? Why has Vietnam been such a, 50 years later, such a salient force in American mind? Why is there still this sense of shame about it? Was Vietnam this industrial power like Germany or Japan was in World War II? It was an agrarian country of peasants. We were the world's most powerful economic and military superpower, and we lost to a third-rate country. And in that context, Americans simply could not acknowledge that somehow the Vietnamese had something to do with it. That if we lost, it had to lie within American society. That's why we pick on the anti-war movement and the media and the politicians. But we rarely understood what the Vietnamese were fighting for and why they were triumphant in the end. And from my perspective, someone here had the United States history book. My guess is if we look at this, that perspective, that question will not be found in here. Fair to say? In fact, at least when I was teaching U.S. history, it was very difficult to even talk about Vietnam, partly as a function of time. I got to maybe to the end of World War II, and that was it. And that was in the last 10 days of school, and the kids are already thinking about summer vacation. But I think there's also another reason why many of us, perhaps subconsciously, were unwilling to talk about Vietnam. It's still controversial. The memories are still there. Teachers are afraid of talking about it, and they go home telling their parents. And the parents, is that something, an occupation hazard that we often have to deal with as public school teachers? I know I got a few phone calls from my days of teaching. So I think there's this notion that somehow Americans cannot grasp how did we lose in the jungles of Vietnam. And most of us can't talk about this war because how many of your classes have, well, I don't even know. This is a problem. I don't know how much you know or what perspective you have. But what I've laid out so far, how much of this is old news and how much of this is kind of a new and different perspective?